Hi everyone, I'm here to talk to you today about fairy tales and classical music. Fairy tales are very popular sources for classical music due to their dramatic senses and due to their nonsensical features and due to that magical element that we all love. So, here are my top 5 fairy tales that I found in classical music. To start, I want to say that these are in no way the absolute top 5 fairy tales that you'll find in classical music. This is purely based on my own research that I want to be able to share with you in what I have discovered. So, with no further ado, let's start with number 5, the Snow Maiden or Snegurochka. The story of the Snow Maiden has been listed as beginning as a folk tale, but as more and more people adapted it, it became more of a fairy tale. One of the earliest versions of the tale is of a young girl and a young boy who make a doll out of snow and call her Snegurochka. In this tale, they bring her into the woods and they build a fire, and so each of them had take turns jumping over the fire. When it gets to Snegurochka's turn, she jumps over the fire, but only makes it halfway and then evaporates into a cloud of mist. In other tales, she is the daughter of the Spring Beauty and Ded Moroz, who is kind of the Slavic version of Father Christmas, if you would like to think of it that way. And Snegurochka wants to live amongst the mortal beings. In this version, she begins to like a shepherd named Lel, but she is incapable of knowing what love is. Her mother, the Spring Beauty, takes pity on her and gives her the capabilities of knowing what love is, but she melts once she receives that ability. This was the version in which the playwright Alexander Ostrowski used as inspiration for his own play, The Snow Maiden, and in turn was set to music, for incidental music, by the composer Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. The fairy tale goes on to be used by Ludwig Minkus and Marius Petipov for their ballet for the Imperial Theatres titled The Daughter of the Snows, and it is also used for the opera The Snow Maiden by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. Number 4. Little Red Riding Hood. The story of a Little Red Riding Hood is obviously a little bit more popular than Snegurochka is in Western culture, but in case you don't know the story, it is of a little girl who has a Red Riding Hood and takes goodies with her into the woods to her grandmother's house. Along the way, she stopped by a wolf who asked her where she's going, and when she says she's going to her grandmother's house, the wolf gets ahead of her, eats the grandmother, and then waits patiently for the Red Riding Hood to get there and eats her as well. Now, Little Red Riding Hood is a little bit more popular in popular culture, but there are still a few bits of classical music in which you can find Little Red Riding Hood in. The American composer Seymour Barab wrote a series of children's operas based on fairy tales, and one of them is the Little Red Riding Hood story. In order to make it a little bit more child-friendly and not to scare the children with the wolf, he has the wolf putting on his makeup at the beginning of the opera. It is also the basis of the third movement of Cinq et tu tableau that was orchestrated by Arino Respighi and music originally written for piano by Sergei Rachmaninoff for the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Sergei Koussevitzky. Number 3. The Sleeping Beauty. The story of the Sleeping Beauty is different depending on which culture you look at, but the common knowledge about the fairy tale is that the girl pricks her finger on a spindle and falls asleep, and only to be awakened by a prince's kiss. The Sleeping Beauty is the basis for many pieces of classical music, such as operas by Michel Koreff and Engelbert Humperdinck, ballets by Harold and Tchaikovsky, and orchestral pieces by Ravel, and many other pieces of music that you can find throughout the history of classical music. Number 2. Bluebeard. Now you may be wondering, isn't Bluebeard actually a French folktale? But actually, in fact, it does have fairy tale elements along with it, so depending on which version you look at, it could be more along a folktale or it could be along the fairy tale. Bluebeard follows the story of a man who continuously marries, but his wives continue to disappear. One day, he goes to his neighbor's house and requests to marry the youngest daughter, and she is married off to him against her will. He leaves for the country and leaves her with the keys to every door in the entire chateau, but forbids her to use the one that will open the basement door. One day she throws a party while he's gone, and she is continuously tempted to open that basement door. She eventually does, and finds all of the dead corpses and blood of all the previous wives. The key was magic, and so she was unable to wash the blood and to pull the key out of the door, so Bluebeard discovers that she was in the basement. He tries to kill her, but the brothers and Anne, her sister, all kill him before he gets to her. Bluebeard is the basis for several ballets, such as one by Piotr Schenk and Marius Petipa, and in 2015 by Marian Nietzsche. It is even more popular in the opera genre, with adaptations by Paul Dukas, Bela Bartok, and Jacques Offenbach. And that brings us to our most popular fairy tale in classical music, number 1, Cinderella. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the story of Cinderella, it follows the story of a girl who is treated like she is a servant by her stepmother and stepsisters, and in some cases her real father is in the story or he's not. The entire kingdom is invited to come to a ball, but the stepmother and stepsisters try and do their best to make sure that Cinderella never gets to it. Taking pity on her, her fairy godmother steps in and gives her a beautiful dress, a pumpkin turned into a carriage, mice turned into horses and coachmen, and glass slippers for her to wear. She is warned that by midnight the spell will have worn off, so she needs to leave as soon as she can. When the clock strikes midnight, she runs out, but she accidentally leaves one of her glass slippers behind. The prince catches up to her, and he tries to find her throughout the next upcoming days by placing the slipper on several women throughout the kingdom in order to try and find Cinderella. He eventually finds her, and to the dismay of the stepmother and stepsisters, she goes off and marries the prince. Those of you who are familiar with the story know that sometimes this story is a little bit more dark, in which the stepmother and stepsisters cut off several parts of their feet in order to try and fit it into the slipper. There are a multitude of different settings in classical music to Cinderella, so I'm just going to list a few of those. One is an opera by Rossini, Cenerentola, then another one by Jules Massenet, Cendrillon, and it was also adapted for a ballet, which is a very popular ballet by Sergei Prokofiev. There are a plethora of other theatrical works and orchestral works set with the idea of Cinderella in them, and there is so many of them that it's just a lot to list. And so those are the top 5 fairy tales found in classical music. If you have others that you know of that you would like to let me know of, put those in the comments below. I love to hear them, and I constantly love to study fairy tales, folk tales, literature in classical music. I highly suggest listening to all of these works. They're all absolutely incredibly and gorgeous, and I highly suggest them. If you haven't done so already, click on that subscribe button. Every day I post a short video that talks about a piece of music, and every week I post a little bit of a longer video on topics such as this and others. So until then, thank you for watching. Bye.